Francisco Ricardo, on a relatively rather cold day, evening in Burbank. I have two stories to tell you. Everybody has kind of adventuresome outliers in their life, things that were kind of moments, defining ones in your life, where you may have wondered, I'm not sure I know how this one's going to work out. How am I going to get out of this thing? And one is from a very early moment in my life, and the other is from a early moment in the last or the first phase of my life as a teenager, kind of going into 20 years of age, something like that. And even though they're in totally different countries, even though they occurred to the same person, namely yours truly, but someone who was completely different in each of those two phases, and certainly different from who I am now, they are signal and defining, as I say, moments in my life, because they have a quality, as many defining moments do, of convincing you that what you have done up to now, even though we're kind of awash these days in philosophies and modes of thought that tell us that we are the creators of our own reality, and we attract everything ourselves, and hard work will get you what you want. It's always up to you. If you don't get it, it's your fault. Even though I think there's truth to all those, and there's value in thinking that, because you can't walk around thinking that the world owes you a living just because you've been the subject of some degree of unfairness, as we all have been. At the same time, even though you may believe all of those philosophies, you have to also accept that, you are not really the master of your destiny, no matter what you think. And in a way, that's kind of a comforting thought. I'm here to offer you an alternative interpretation of the fact that you are really not in control of a lot of your life, and that maybe that's a good thing. So here's the first thing that happened. People who know me know this, I guess, event in my life. When I was born in Cuba, and at the time, the year was 1962. And so at the time, Fidel Castro's very repressive regime was already in control, in full power, in full flight throughout the country. Everyone who had any money, any status, any land, and any wisdom about what it takes to work hard for things and build up on them had already left the country. And I can tell you so many stories about what happened at that time, but certainly at the time that I was born, that meant that many doctors, surgeons, many great people of medicine were already in the United States. Because as highly intelligent and educated individuals, they were able to see right through the, patronizing demagoguery of Fidel Castro, and they were able to see that he was not who the relatively uneducated and general public, which comprised the masses of that country, kind of the way that the masses of this country are swayed by some presidents recently. They didn't see it as the way that those masses would see that leader. Charismatic people can be very dangerous when they go for the public voice and they reach for power. And so that's what I think we had going on there. And the upshot of that is that it affected my life even practically before I was born. Because in the hospital where I was born, whose name was Quinta Covadonga, is his name, It was a religious hospital, and there were in the incubation unit where I was born 10 other babies who had been born in the same 24-hour period or 48-hour period. I think they were pretty much around the same time. I obviously never met any of these people, and I wouldn't have minded having become friends so that we could see how from the same seed, as it were, of that moment in space and time, we would have had lives that flourished and in large part diverged sufficiently to compare and to share many perspectives and experiences. It's just a fact that people who come from the same place where you've been born and at the same time as you were born share an uncanny number of traits in your life. It's kind of weird, no matter where they've moved or how they were brought up. And nonetheless, something happened where I think there's room for speculating about the cause of this thing, but nonetheless, there was an outbreak in this incubation unit of a staphylococcal infection, which affected all the newborns. Now, staphylococcal infections are, as a bacterium, extremely virulent and can kill a fully functioning male or female of an adult population anywhere in the world in a matter of, I don't know, maybe perhaps less than a month. It's one of the most dangerous and deadly bacterial infections that can affect the body for a number of reasons, one of which it affects the blood. It's very destructive, and it's the force behind a number of infectious diseases, which in places like third world countries are still difficult to control because of their ease of transmission and their difficulty of eradication in the body. The way you get rid of a staphylococcal infection is through a mycin-like antibiotic of the highest potency possible, a potency so required to be so high that an oral version of the antibiotic will not help, the way that people take antibiotics today as pills or tablets. This has to be injected directly into the body. And so that would have been the clear solution in the case of these 10 newborns, myself included. And it is a relatively cheap and easy to make antibiotic. Mycin-type antibiotics are the leading antibiotic types, of which you've seen streptomycin and bacitracin and many other versions. But one of the things that happened is that the country of Cuba, fearing an invasion and pending war with the United States, began to stockpile mycin-like antibiotic in military reserve barracks and other storage facilities, and made that available only in the event that soldiers should need it, should there be some kind of chemical or perhaps some other serious battlefield type of injury at a mass level, and they needed battle or war readiness, for which reason this antibiotic was not available in the potency necessary to save someone who would have something like a staphylococcal infection. And it just so happens that there were several people in my family who worked in the hospital as nurses. And an aunt named Reina, to whom I owe my life twice over, but certainly she made herself indispensable to me, and to this day I regret not having been able to understand that until much later, and to show my gratitude to her, because of course I didn't know about the story in its full scope until much later anyway. Did not want to see me die or any of the other children, and searching around for the antibiotic proved to be a frustrating and futile project. And what she did eventually is, when she found out that the stockpile was being held at a military facility and that there was no way to actually get this for civilian purposes, went to the Minister of Defense for the entire country and requested, or perhaps demanded, as she was definitely a force of nature, an appointment with this minister. And explaining her case, was told that what I've said now, that this antibiotic was not going to be available, so you can forget about it right there. We're in a state of near war with the United States, and many bad things can happen, etc., etc. So she didn't take no for an answer, because she realized that the only way that I was going to be able to survive was going to be to get her hands on some of that antibiotic. Hard to imagine your life being born under punches this early. Already there's conflict concerning your own survivability, isn't there? And it's a cautionary tale for anybody who thinks that their life is not exactly, lucky. Most people are not born under conflicts or dilemmas around which their lives, revolve. And she practically threatened the minister, saying to him that unless he gave her enough dose for at least one child, that he would live to regret it, because she would tell everyone. And that would become a huge problem for this new government. It's been around for 6-7 years. And so to basically to shut her up, he gave her enough dose for several, I think, weeks or months, but for really either, several children or one, depending what it was. She grabbed it, ran out of there, and immediately I was injected with this. But knowing that she was never going to be able to get any other, dose dispensations, she gave me only this dose, and I was injected with this thing from the moment I was born for quite a while, many months. And so as a result of this, I lived. But since no one else got that dose, the other 9 children in that unit died, and died very quickly thereafter. She didn't say anything about this because, well, of course, life in a communist country, as with any other situation, when you deal with power structures, you have to pick your battles, and this is one that she felt she had won. I survived. So I'm here, almost 60 years later, here to tell you that first moment of my life was defined by something over which I had obviously no knowledge nor control. The second moment in my life, and there were many, but this one is a slightly more humorous version of it, was when I was working early on in my late teens. I had worked trying to sell encyclopedias in New York City. There are various funny and historical reasons as to why I accepted and took this job, one of which was my belief in education, because I had grown up with 2 encyclopedias that my parents had purchased when we left Cuba for Spain, and those encyclopedias were for me a godsend. I was able to really get a level of erudition that I think would not have been within my reach no matter what, particularly since after arriving in the United States, my sister and I were subjected to the vagaries of the public school system in this country. But nonetheless, in the 1970s, in the New York area, when we arrived at the metropolis of the entire New York nucleus, we arrived at a time when the city was extremely violent and aggressive and did not take kindly to outsiders, particularly Hispanics who were called spics, such as we were. And nobody had any interest in showing us anything. But nonetheless, we had no choice. We had to make our way through here. And be that as it may, eventually, when I took this job, I really did feel that I could make a difference. It wasn't like cold calling. You didn't go around, in New York City and knocking on doors and ask people if they wanted to buy an encyclopedia. It wasn't like that. It was actually coordinated through a very large number of Catholic schools with which I had no affiliation, but the company for which I worked did, and I taught in those schools. And the encyclopedia was Grolier at the time, such as it was the opportunity for me to do something in the way of education in a non-public way, and with a medium and an instrument that I did believe in. And also it gave me another, really I would have to say, fascinating sidelight into what it was like to walk into the homes of the lower and lower middle class of New York City. And so I primarily worked, although I worked in Brooklyn and in Manhattan, I primarily worked in the Bronx. And selling encyclopedias in the Bronx at that time is something for which I have been encouraged to write a book. The only question is, will it be a comedy or a tragedy? It's hard to tell the things that one can see in these circumstances, of which then I will now provide you with one specimen example. At the time I was working, at first, I was working under the tutelage or apprenticeship of a more senior salesperson who actually had encouraged me to get this job. This guy's name was Raul Naranjo. I still remember him as Cuban, much older than me. And learning a job such as this, which requires you to be persuasive and sensitive and very articulate at every level in all kinds of homes, means that while you're learning a job such as this, you need to be with someone so that you can understand both the way of selling something which has a high price point and may encounter some resistance, as well as something for which you have to build a kind of value that you know will be there in its use over time, but which may not be as apparent to parents early on. Because while people love the idea of an encyclopedia, and this is obviously long before the internet, the whole notion of spending hundreds and hundreds of dollars for something like this requires a little bit of persuasion, even among the positively oriented and most supportive of parents. After all, everyone is working with limited means. And so in one of the appointments that we had, it was in this tenement building in the South Bronx. It was a summer of which I think there are many, and which is very memorable because of the heat and humidity. And imagine it'd be about August, about maybe 6:30 in the afternoon. The sun's still out. It's very warm. And as we approached the building in which there was the apartment for which we had the appointment, I couldn't help but noticing several things. One of which, the monumentality of this building, this enormous building, was such that while it was a brick building, perhaps 8 or 10 stories high, the first and second floor, had a non-brick base, but actually were these enormous, I guess they would be something like cinder blocks, but they weren't cinder blocks, they were cement blocks that stuck out, each of which was probably about 2.5, 3 feet large. And as they stuck out, they basically had these rounded corners that would go right back into the wall, so you would see them going up and then up and up and up as a kind of facade to give you the strength necessary for this probably building built maybe in the 1930s, to give you a notion of its, again, kind of like imposing enormity and strength. So this kind of classical kind of design which again harked back clearly before the first, or I mean, maybe first, the Second World War, or something like that. Made a kind of a stark contrast with the 6 or 7 these like Puerto Rican guys that were just hanging there in kind of wife beater A shirts, with nothing to do in the front of the building. There's a walk up, and these guys are just standing there drinking beer, and you could see they were unshaven and a rather slovenly lot, if you don't mind my saying so. And there we were with, our blazers and our ties, trying to make the best impression. We walk in right past them. We did get a look. And then we went down the hallway, up the stairs, and made our way to the apartment whose door we knock on. Whereupon a small, kind of roundish woman who was Hispanic, I don't know where she was from, I think she was Puerto Rican, opens the door, and I can see past her into this hallway that goes into the apartment. The hallway was probably at least 15 feet long. And this was, again, a time when buildings like this in New York were the prevalent model. The ceilings were probably 10, 11-foot ceilings. And these were all obviously rent control at this point. So she opens the door and receives us at the appointed hour, expected us. And she said, "Come on in." And as we walk in, we're walking through this long, dark hallway, and we finally arrive at the living room, where there is a couch, and there must have been 300 kids running around. I don't know, she probably had 6 kids, 5, 6 kids. Mayhem, noise, and lots of motion. And we, in making this appointment, the man who coordinated through the encyclopedia company to make the appointment wanted to make sure always that we would have knowledge whether there's going to be a husband or not, because you sell an expensive item and the husband's not there. He gets home, he looks at the bill, and he wants to return the thing. So you want to make sure you're talking to both parents and that the decision is mutual. It's a serious one. There's some commitment. And on this appointment slip, as we had seen, there were the letters NHW written on it, which stood for no husband work, which meant that when she was asked on the phone, "Is your husband going to be home," etc., she said, "I don't have a husband." So it's as far as you can go with that, and we therefore began our little sales presentation, which involved putting down a kind of broadside type poster. The poster had some electrical contacts on it, so that there was this little light that if you pressed on it on certain parts of the poster where there were questions and answers, the light button, the light on the pen would light up if you were touching the right answer. And there were questions about, for example, letters and numbers, etc. The encyclopedia system that we were selling at that particular home was for up to 3rd grade, and there was this little boy there who, incredibly enough, was actually very, I think, kind of special needs. He didn't really understand the questions, and we had done this many times before, and he was actually a little bit behind, and I kind of felt bad about that, so I tried to be as gentle and slow and repetitive as possible. But still, he was having a little trouble understanding even the basic questions. And so we go through the entire presentation. As you can tell, we were very careful. You can surmise that we were gentle, and she was very receptive. And as we were about to get to "So would you be interested in this, Mrs. Gomez," whatever, we were speaking Spanish. She's like, "Oh yeah, absolutely, I'd love this. Yeah, this is great, let's do it." And she went to go get a checkbook, which is a standard way to pay back in that day for an acquisition such as this. And she sits down, opens her checkbook. Now, mind you, we're on the 2nd floor, and there's huge open windows on the side because it's warm. It's a warm day out. And as she begins to write on her checkbook, a hand really comes in through the window, which then hoists up shoulders and one of the scraggly heads we had seen in the sidewalk. And the man says, "What is this? What are you guys doing here?" And I had not really been prepared for a drunken man to walk in through the window of a second-story apartment in a tenement building in New York. And this drunkard turns out to have been, I suppose, maybe not her husband, but he was certainly something to her, because he then sticks his leg in and makes his way into the apartment. Whereupon she tries to tell him, oh, we're getting an encyclopedia. And he becomes increasingly worked up and rather irate, considering that there are now two men in the house. And for a drunken man, two men in a house talking to the wife has a very distinct feeling of problem that he needs to deal with. And he's bolstered in his confidence by the fact that we can't help but notice that despite his kind of undershirt and slovenly look, sticking up out of the belt of his jeans is a gun. It's a revolver, I can tell. And then he immediately produces the revolver and points it at us. Now, I don't know, he must have been like maybe 3 feet away. And perhaps because I was young and relatively naive, I attempt to talk the guy down and to explain to him that this is for his family and that this is for his child, etc. And Raul, being older and somewhat more wiseacred in the ways of the world at that point, and I thought I knew a thing or two, literally grabs the poster that we had on the floor and crumples it like a used piece of toilet paper, shoves it into the box that we had some of our toys and books to show, grabs me by the arm, and immediately just smiles and starts making our way back out the door. He realizes that there's no rational conversation to be had with an angry man who's drunk and got a gun and he's in his house. I think at that point I began to understand that my mortality is something I ought to spend some time thinking about once in a while. That job did give me pause for that more than once. Trust me when I tell you, more than once. And so, as we're walking away, I notice that we have to go back out through the same hallway. This is a hallway that, again, was 10 or 15 feet, and the woman is walking behind us, telling us, come back later. I want to buy this encyclopedia. Don't worry about him. And I can't believe that we lived making our way out of that, because that 15-foot corridor became something like a 400-meter walk of death. I could only imagine as I turned around and I saw him there, he's basically at this point closing one eye and trying to take aim at us a little bit. And I was trying to talk to her, but as I'm looking at her, I'm basically trying to get behind her a little bit so that at least she'll stop the bullet if it comes right down to it, because you're not going to outrun a bullet in a hallway or anywhere else. We left, and she said, meet me in the schoolyard at 8 o'clock. I'll go get it. I want to do this. And he felt that was futile, and while we yesed her to death, I insisted that we go to the schoolyard at 8 p.m. to meet her because she was going to be there. And he was convinced that would never happen, and sure enough, from 8 to about 8:40, we were waiting there. She never showed up, and we left. Now, my friends, I bring these two examples to you to point out two things, which is that there are many points in your life where you don't really know, where what appears to be a rather sanguine and safe circumstance can turn sideways, right? In one case, I was just being born. I had nothing against anyone. I had no quarrel or cause. And in the other, I was trying to just talk to someone about something that was beneficial for her child. And while she was with the program, nonetheless, there was someone else involved in that child's life who pops up and interprets the situation in completely different ways. So, if I were going to identify for you two moments where the potentiality of the end of my life was going to be near, it would not have been either of those two. And yet there they were. I'm coming to you tonight just thinking about those two things as a way of offering to you a counter, a reinterpretation of that notion that you, in fact, really do attract your reality and that you're in control of everything. There is an extremely large element of your own life which is not in your control. That things are really despite your best effort, out of your hands many a time. And that is not a cause for anxiety, concern, frustration, and despair, but I would say an invitation instead to live with faith and to live persuaded in the notion that you are here because, yes, on an everyday basis, your intentions are being enforced by your own will and the discipline that you have to focus one step in front of the other in the realization of your intentions. But at the same time, you're also here because there's something greater than you, which has control of your life in moments where it really matters. And your life is therefore the result of a kind of collaboration of wills. You're not alone in this, therefore. Make the effort that you need to make, but don't go beyond it. Until next time.